My name's Jennifer Morell. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of the Elections Group. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, the Elections Group is a team of election experts supporting election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. We've all worked in election offices, so myself and my team, we know firsthand the challenges faced by all of you, faced by election officials. And we like to think that we use our real world experience to help solve some of the challenges that you're dealing with. I'm really excited today that we are talking about election testing, and I'm especially excited because I'm joined today by two people who have such a wealth of experience and knowledge when it comes to voting systems and the testing process to ensure the integrity of those voting systems. So I'm joined by Ryan Macias. Ryan is a former election administrator, election professional, known election security expert, and Matthew Chalahak. He is our senior election expert here at TAG. And Matthew, Ryan, would you both, let's start with Ryan and do a quick introduction for our participants.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, my name is Ryan Macias. I've been working in the election technology and election security space for almost 20 years now. I spent the first 11 years leading the Office of Voting Systems for the Secretary of State of California, then moved on to the United States Elections Assistance Commission, where I was the acting director of the Voting Systems Program. And then have just continued to work in the election technology and security space as a subject matter expert consultant to both state and local governments, as well as a lot of the private sector partners that we work here with at TAG. So back to you, Jennifer.
Great. And Matt.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really happy to be here with you and Ryan as well. For joining TAG in 2023, I was an election administrator in the state of Ohio, served at both the county and the state level, and worked a lot with system technologies and testing and guiding the local boards of elections in that state with regards to this topic as well as a wealth of other topics. But this is an exciting time. It's challenging. There's always new things happening, and so we're just excited to kind of reapproach this topic that's really important to election administration. So thanks for letting me be here.
Fantastic. Well, folks, we have a lot to cover today. So Matt, let's go ahead and get started with our presentation. So unlike some of the webinars that we have that are more conversational or panel driven, what we're presenting today, we've got a brand new election testing guide, which we'll share the link with you all. And we've got this broader training that we do around the guide, and you're getting a little bit of a taster of that today. What we hope you get out of this is an understanding of how important testing is, recognizing how testing can both prevent or detect errors, thinking about developing efficient testing methods. We know that testing happens under a really constrained time frame. And then we hope to give you some ideas about some additional testing methods that you might use. As we go through, you can read the outline there. One thing that I would encourage everybody to do is we've got both the chat open as well as the Q&A feature open. Please, we want this to be as interactive as we can make it, given that it's a Zoom webinar, but please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as you're listening to Ryan and Matt. I will do my best to pause them and raise that question. It's so much easier if we can raise those during the relevant parts of the material versus waiting at the end. So please feel free to drop those. We'll also do some Q&A when we get to the end. This is a link to our brand new guide. It's long, it's comprehensive, but it's also really easy to follow. We love our checklists, and it includes some great checklists for you all as you're thinking about enhancing your current testing process. This session supports some of the standards set out by the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence, which the Elections Group is a partner organization. And I encourage you to go look closer at the standards around ballot creation, specifically the ballot and audit standards. And one of those standards talks about the importance of testing. So I'm going to take just a minute and talk about communicating our testing. You know, election offices all over the country do this. So often, though, we miss the opportunity to really inform stakeholders and voters and members of our community what's happening. So let's think about some resources to help you talk about it. We have what we call our testing explainer or an observer guide. This is great if you have people showing up to your public test and you want a quick one-pager that you can hand to them that outlines what the test does, why you're testing, some of the vocabulary that might be helpful for them to understand as you're going through the public test. Like all of our materials, this is customizable. You can change the colors, you can add your own logo, you can adjust the wording. We've tried to make that available in several formats, so it's easy for you to customize. We also have something we worked on last year called, we call it our security sandwich. And we do that because we think about these various layers of security that these practices that happen both pre-election, during the election, and post-election to ensure the security and integrity of the ballot. Again, I won't talk through these, but this is a template. This is meant to be customized. Again, you can change the color, the wording, add your logo. What we hope is helpful about this is we've been able to work with technical experts like Ryan to really understand both the things that are happening prior to the election, so like the pre-certification, the voting system standards, and provide the language for you so that you have a foundation to then work with to make this something of your own. And this guide can be useful if you're trying to put information out on your website or to use in social media posts, or again, if you're doing tours of your facility, or you just want a little bit deeper dive of a handout for people showing up to your public test. This is a great guide to help with that. All right, and Matthew, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. So the importance of election testing, I think we all realize that testing, of course, is important. It's something we do before every election. And, you know, one of the things we kind of wanted to discuss is the systems that we actually use, because the systems have changed over the years, right? We have different technologies that we've employed to help with efficiency, to help with accuracy. So let's just quickly talk about what testing really does. Testing verifies that the equipment or the technology used in an election is actually working as expected. It's working properly, right? It also validates that the voting system software is correct and it hasn't been modified between the time that the ballot was programmed and the equipment was loaded with the election definition files and ready to go for the election. It also helps us identify those errors, those issues that we might have accidentally put into the program. Maybe it's the way that a candidate appears or the information that appears in an office title. Whatever it might be, this testing process is important to really pinpoint those errors and help us identify those. And of course, you know what? We can share this with the community at large because it safeguards from attacks. It allows us to understand that the system is working properly as expected, as we said, and it helps us safeguard against those threats and risks that are out there. And then, of course, I think we're all proud of this. It maintains transparency. The work that you do, you should share this, as Jennifer just talked about. It opens it up to, you know, people's eyes and allows them to understand the work we do to ensure an accurate and proper election is being conducted. So let's just think for a moment and use the chat to respond to this, please. I'd like to kind of us to think about the systems that you use in election administration. So just take a moment, please, and put that in the chat now. Go ahead and list those system technologies that you use. We obviously know there's the voting system now, but what else is there? So electronic poll books, thank you. Yes, that's a big one. What are some other ones that we use maybe thinking last election day, but maybe it's a little bit before. Maybe it's before the election. So yeah, we have system vendors out there, but specific system technologies as far as like, I don't want to give it away because I'm asking you to list, but election night reporting systems, that's right. A tracking inventory system, ballot on demand for ballot printing, that's great. Yeah, we have the VRS, the voter registration systems. If everyone has a little different approach by state, it depends who you are, but we have that registration software that's really fundamental to our office administration. Poll worker management system, this is great. Other softwares that are out there, tabulation, part of the voting system typically. Yeah, that's great. So thank you for sharing those. So those are all systems that we use in the election administration space, right? Those are the things that you're familiar with, that you're using all the time. But now let's think about the testing of those systems. So we know that we use a lot of different systems, but do we do as rigorous of a test on those systems as we typically would before an election on our voting system? Because we know that testing these systems ensures that the systems we use in the elections are configured properly and functioning as expected. So we know that we test the voting systems before each election, but what about those other systems that you mentioned? What layer of testing is being done for those as well? We test the equipment and we test how everything is working, that's used for ballot programming, for overseas voting, for voter check-in, for ballot content and ballot style assignment, for vote counting, for the aggregation of results and reporting or displaying election results publicly. So all those different layers now of our election system as a whole needs to be part of our testing. Even the more minute details, for example, maybe you just got a new shipment of paper rolls that are loaded into your voting equipment or used in your e-poll book printers. Is it the right type of paper? Is it the thermal paper that you needed? Or maybe it's not thermal paper and it is thermal paper. Are you testing all of those little aspects of your election systems? And I mean, let's just be honest here. The systems that we have to deal with, it's pretty advanced. I mean, look at this quick diagram here that was put together by Kennesaw State University. It shows the interaction of our voting and election system, and it's really pretty complex. I mean, we always joke that, election administrators are now also IT experts, you're security experts, you're like underpaid wedding planners, right? You have so many things to deal with. And this just does a good job of kind of illustrating that. All of the different systems that are a part of your office, and something that needs to be done all the time before every election, but also really these systems are going to be tested even more frequently than that. So we have a lot of different layers, a lot of different challenges posed with all of these systems, but I want you to keep in mind that the testing is really important. So now let's think about it. We know kind of those systems that are out there. You've all shared some of the systems. What testing processes do you use and have you implemented to ensure each of these are operating properly? So for example, as we go to this slide, we'll show you that interaction that we have between our systems. We have this interoperability, if you will, between our systems, and they have to work in concert. For example, we know that the electronic poll book in most or many jurisdictions prints a ballot style information to assign the voter their correct ballot. So that ballot style must match the information that's in the voting system. And then conversely, if you look at the voting system, that's used to export election results that some of you will then use to put on your website or use a software application to report those election night results. And so the information that's generated from your voting system, therefore, has to match your ENR system as well. So what effort are you putting in to test to make sure that everything is accurate? What does this involve? It involves more time. It involves more people. It involves more planning. And we'll kind of get to that as we go through today's presentation. But just want to kind of set the tone. We know when testing is important, but we want to make sure that we've lined up our resources properly to properly conduct those tests. All right, back to Jennifer.
Actually, I think we're going to hand it over to Ryan now to talk about roles, responsibilities, and risks. And I don't see any questions yet. So, Ryan, take it away.
So I do see a hand up though, Jennifer, from Rebecca Manriquez. I don't know if there's an opportunity to come off mute and ask the question, or if it should just, oh, looks like it went down. All right. Well, thank you for handing it over, Jennifer. So first, I just want to get into what are some of the risks. If you don't test sufficiently, historically, the major issues that have arisen included machine malfunctions. So things like ballots being rejected and potentially needing to be remade or centrally tabulated, incorrect initial counts and reporting, incorrect software running on the voting machines. Then there's been security vulnerabilities that have gone undiscovered and are not mitigated, either procedurally or technologically. Software configuration errors, which can again lead to ballot rejections and initial counts or reporting being inaccurate, but can also lead to the voter getting the incorrect ballot content. So for instance, they're given the wrong ballot. They're given a ballot with wrong or missing contests and candidates on it. And this all leads to a decline in public trust and erodes voter confidence. So one of the things we're going to do is looking at some of those issues that have occurred throughout the election cycle. So here's some headlines from election technology issues that have arisen in the recent past. Many of these items could have been detected and mitigated by implementing robust testing procedures. And we're not trying to highlight these items to call out specific jurisdictions or specific elections officials. Rather, it's just to show you that voters see, this is what voters see and how it can create the distrust and lack of confidence referenced on the last slide. We recognize that elections are a human process and mistakes are going to be made. Elections officials will not be able to rectify every issue, but each of these issues likely could have been mitigated prior to the election with additional testing. Our industry is under constant attack. And responding to these issues and constantly responding to these issues that have occurred. Building that trust back once an error has been identified takes significant time and resources. They are costly. We hear that the cost of testing is prohibitive and makes it difficult, both time and cost. But what I really want you to recognize is spending additional resources in advance of the election is much more efficient than trying to do so in response to an error. Errors are going to occur, but putting the effort up front to mitigate these issues can save you a ton of time and money. So who has ever experienced an error that could have been identified and remediated through testing? We're going to launch a poll for you to answer a yes or no question. The data is anonymous. We're only going to show the results, so we're not going to call out any of you who may have made a mistake. But just think through. Are there things that you may have identified in your testing if you had done some more robust testing? Things like, maybe the wrong voter file being exported from your voter registration system into your e-poll book. So when a voter showed up, it looked like they weren't registered. Or if you use your e-poll book to generate a ballot, whether it be a ballot on demand, and the wrong ballot got printed, or it created the activation code for your ballot marking device and it activated the wrong ballot. These are the types of things that, again, you can identify and mitigate through testing. So, just take some time and, answer honestly this yes or no question. And I'm going to go ahead and continue forward with best practices for testing election systems. And so we want to get into a few of these practices just to kind of highlight some of the stuff that is in our guide. So as Matthew was talking about, due to the introduction of various systems used by elections officials, we saw that wonderful slide from Kennesaw State, and I will highlight that was first introduced, I believe it was back in 2012. So that's how long a lot of these technologies and systems have been around. But with these various systems used by elections officials, what does it actually mean to test before the election? And what that means is being redefined. Before the advent of some of these additional technologies and technological advances, elections officials primarily focused their testing on the voting equipment used to process votes and the tabulation systems used to count these votes. This testing became known as logic and accuracy testing, LNA, or LAT, pre-LAT and post-LAT. Today, with the increase of election technologies, there are many types of pre-election testing, which cover all your election technologies, not just your voting systems. The guide will get into a lot of those additional types of testing, and I'm going to hit on some of them here in the best practices. But even in regards to your voting system, there's more that you can do than just LNA. And so here are a few. Test all your election technologies used in the election. LNA only tests the election-specific database is functioning properly. It does not ensure that the system is running the correct or certified software. To do that, you need to do a validation test. So validate the system by conducting software validation testing, which is also known as hash testing. The public is constantly questioning whether our voting systems are operating the approved software. This is a very easy thing to prove to them by conducting this type of test, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Also, conduct a logic and accuracy test to ensure the election definition or election-specific data is functioning as you expect it to, and that the data is accurately reflecting the outputs you expect to see. Perform a test for the public. Many jurisdictions must announce and invite the public to observe their testing. This is a best practice, and you should follow state law for who to invite, when to conduct it, but providing the public, including media, political parties, and candidates, builds transparency and enables them to understand the systems and processes better. And then retest after election day, during your canvass, before certification. Things can happen during the election. For instance, misprinted ballots, misprogrammed machines, wrong machines at a voting location, etc. These can result in changes to the election definition data files. You should always retest before you redeploy systems if any changes are made. But regardless, retesting after an election ensures the programming remains as it was before the election. For example, to ensure it's the same as it was during the pre-election logic and accuracy testing. Just as performing the pre-election logic and accuracy test can prove that the database is operational before the election, and hash testing can prove it is running the correct or certified voting system software, post-election testing can show that it remains in that same state. So, quick question to the crowd. What type of ballots do you have? Go ahead and just put this in the chat. If you can go ahead and proceed, Matthew, to the next slide. I want to talk about testing. Oh, sorry about that. Testing all of your paper ballots. So this is another type of testing that you can conduct. So what type of ballots do you have? For instance, do you print on demand? We saw some of you dropping in the chat earlier that you use ballot on demand printing. Do you print in office? Do you have, a production facility, maybe to do your supplementals, maybe to send out some provisionals, or when you're running on a shortage during election day? Do you use a vendor? Do you use a ballot marking device to create your ballots? So those of you that have voting system software loaded by your vendor can, and many do, test to make sure that the vendor put the correct version on your devices. All of you test your ballot programming through logic and accuracy, whether you code it in-house or use someone else, such as a vendor, to do it for you. So in doing so, you can test each device, and you prove that the ballots or the ballot PDFs generated from the system are accurate. So why wouldn't you do the same thing to ensure that all your paper printouts are correct as well? Just as a vendor may send the wrong or incorrect election definition files to you, a ballot printer could print the incorrect file. And similar to when you catch an error in your ballot programming through LNA, you can catch an error from misprinted or incorrect ballot types. Many jurisdictions say, well, our vendor prints our test decks, so we are testing our ballots. First, that's only one type of ballot you use. We just went over the multitude of types of ballots you may have. You may be printing them in-house or on demand. So are you testing those? Second, is your test deck ever going to get in the hands of your voters? And is it from the same production run or the same batch as the ballots that you are going to use during the election? They are not. So when you receive your ballots from your vendor that you will deploy, just grab a few out, take a random sample and test them. They may have been printed on different machines, completely different technologies, or just in a different batch than what was tested during your LNA. All of these things can impact the quality and the ability for you to be able to scan them properly. Even where they are stored can create humidity issues, and the ballots can expand or contract, meaning that you need to change the thickness of the scanning technology. So when you receive these ballots, just pull a few and test them. And similarly, you want to do a quality control on the ballots that are going to be sent directly from the vendor, such as absentee or mail-in ballots. Two ways I've seen this performed is by having the vendor pull a sampling of the ballots to send to you that you can test, or you can send someone to the printer along with a tabulator to test a sample of the ballots as they're coming directly off of the printing press. Now I want to get into software validation and hash testing. A hash value is what we call a digital fingerprint. It means it's unique to a certain set of data. Any modifications to that data is going to result in a different hash value. Therefore, a hash validation is a simple solution elections officials can use to prove the voting system software has not been modified. The process for every voting system is a little different, but the EAC requires the vendor to have written instructions for how to perform the test. So there are procedures for your system. Also, each EAC certified system has the values that are produced through the hashing process. And if you're not using an EAC certified system, the voting system testing laboratory and your chief election official should have a copy of the approved hash values that it tested or certified. The process is a little technical, but your vendor or the EAC field staff can assist in the process. And it's a best practice to do a hash validation in addition to logic and accuracy, because software validation does not assess or ensure that the election-specific data is accurate. That is verified through an LNA test. So this is what a software validation can look like. And while it may not be feasible to check every voting device prior to each election, you can test a sample of the equipment. A best practice for doing this is using the software validation procedures and instructions that are included in your certified voting system software. Generate a hash value from a representative sample of the voting equipment, including the voting system election management system, the central count tabulators, precinct tabulators, and ballot marking devices. After you compute the hash value, verify it against the hash values provided by the trusted source, such as EAC, VSTL, Voting System Testing Laboratory, or chief election official, to ensure that they are identical. If they are identical, then you know that the test is successful and that you are running the certified software. And if your jurisdiction does nothing else prior to each election, it should perform a system validation on the election management, the voting system election management software before each election. Now, you all conduct logic and accuracy testing prior to each election, so I'm not going to belabor these next few slides, but I do just want to highlight the overall objectives of logic and accuracy testing, and all three are here on the slide.
Ryan,
Yep.
I'm going to interrupt. We have a question before you move on. What percentage of equipment do you recommend testing?
So it's going to vary. What I like to say is it needs to be feasible for you. And so if you are using a methodology, and we get into this in the guide actually, but if you're using like a vote center model, you can actually test less because it has every single ballot style on it. It's going to take longer to do a single device because it has more ballot styles, but you could probably get away with doing one. If you're using a precinct model, then you're going to want to try to test, multiple different precincts to ensure that the right precinct is being assigned to the right machine. But there is, an entire section on this inside the guide. So jumping back to logic and accuracy, I won't hit on these. Matt, if we just go to the next slide since they've been up on screen for a minute. But problems discovered during LNA generally identify issues with the election-specific data rather than voting system software. So an LNA can detect issues in the election-specific data or prove that the voting machines are operating accurately and as intended. Now, one thing that is interesting is based on the historical nature, we as elections officials tend to describe logic and accuracy testing as a single test, but they're not. They are actually two distinctly different tests, and they test for different things. You have a logic test, and you have an accuracy test. Logic testing ensures that a vote cast for a particular candidate or option is correctly recorded and tallied for the candidate or option. In other words, a voter selection for candidate 1 is tabulated as a vote for candidate 1, while a voter selection for candidate 2 is tabulated for candidate 2. Whereas accuracy testing is verifying that the voting system accurately counts those votes. The system is tested by feeding a known set of inputs, such as a predetermined set of votes, and then checking the outputs to make sure that things match and the results are accurate. So logic testing, as I said, ensures that the election-specific files are programmed correctly. It confirms every ballot style is loaded onto the respective devices, that each ballot style is displayed properly on a BMD, that proper ballot styles are accepted or rejected by the respective scanners. So for instance, if you're only programmed for precinct 1, if I scan precinct 2, it accurately rejects it and it accurately accepts precinct 1. It looks for ballot exceptions and makes sure that they're handled properly. Things like overvotes, blank ballots, write-ins, provisionals, etc. And it also includes making sure that the audio files, accessibility features and devices, passwords, and other security features are all operating as you intended them to be operating. So the next slide, again, I'm not going to go through this workflow, but these are the types of things that are in our guide. We've got little checklists that can show you how to lay out your logic testing and the workflow so that you can operate a logic test separately or alongside an accuracy test. So now let's look at accuracy testing. System accuracy is tested, as I had stated, by feeding a known set of results. This should be conducted on every tabulator and on your voting system election management system to ensure that the reporting software inside the election management system is aggregating the results from every individual device correctly. And it's not just the aggregation, but it is also that reporting. So make sure that you generate a file from your EMS and test that into your election night reporting system, since that's the data that will be transferred to that external system or your election night reporting system. And so similarly here, you can see a workflow. So you can kind of lay out process and procedures, and we have checklists that coincide with this. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Matthew to go over a public test.
Thank you, Ryan. So what is a public test? So many of you do this all the time, right? Before every election, it's a requirement in most state laws. It's something that you're familiar with doing, and certainly something that you probably feel is kind of more of an obligation, but it's also an opportunity to demonstrate to the public the process that you go through before each election to ensure the accuracy of your election results. So we know that the public test or the demonstration often involves a smaller sampling of the number of machines that were already tested for the election. It usually takes place at a publicized date and time. Oftentimes, you have to, by law, allow members of the public to attend this meeting to go through this testing process with folks. But oftentimes, it's more of an observation opportunity. So there's some wiggle room potentially under your state law or your policies that you may have in your office to allow members of the public to actually maybe engage even more in the public test so that they also feel like they've been a part of this, that nothing has been like manufactured, but it's actually a real test showing the accuracy of the election. So it provides this opportunity to the public how the voting equipment is physically and digitally secured as well. They can see the seals on the voting equipment at this time, understanding the chain of custody procedures that you go through as well. It's really that opportunity to engage with the public and to explain to them all the steps involved in making sure the election can be trusted, right? It adds a more genuine opportunity for observance. And the more you do that, the more you allow folks to be a part of that, the more likely you can dispel that inaccurate criticism that generates from time to time around elections. So again, we know it takes place on a publicized date and time. It usually involves a smaller sampling of the overall equipment that has been tested. And it's just, again, an opportunity to educate those in attendance on what you do and really how you do it. So let's just spend a moment on post-election testing. So post-election testing in some state laws is a requirement. It's oftentimes viewed with a little bit of confusion just because it's one of those things that can be a bit challenging. Back in the day, there was a time that you actually had to clear your tabulator, so you had to back up all of your election results, clear the counters to zero, and then rerun ballots through scanners, and then export the media from those scanners and then load that back into your system. Technology has come a bit of a ways now, so I think there's some easier ways for you folks to be able to do that with your election management system. But it's oftentimes required, as I said, but it's a good step to take and something that you should consider incorporating into your overall testing approach. What this does is it demonstrates that the voting system software operates as expected based on your prior testing, and it continues throughout the entire life cycle of your election to tabulate the ballots accurately. So a best practice would be to run both the software validation, as Ryan spoke about and shared with you, and an accuracy test prior to certifying the election results. Oftentimes, again, this is kind of a public session. Folks will be there for the final certification. This would be steps you could go through to demonstrate to the public and to those in attendance all the steps that you take to maintain the integrity of the election. And really, it's this final showcase to demonstrate that no files, no databases have been altered or corrupted throughout the election process. So important things to consider. We have information in our guide that goes more in depth into this. So we welcome you folks to take an opportunity to go through that guide and take a look. Next, I want to just quickly touch on implementing best practices and give you folks an opportunity to ask some questions about some of the content that we shared with you today. So at the elections group, we talk a lot about standard operating procedures, probably to a point where I kind of get sick of even hearing the word, but it's such an important element of any office, right? To be able to outline all the procedures that you go through so that folks are doing things systematically, they're doing things uniformly, but it also helps, especially with practices like testing, to remember what you're supposed to do, right? Testing isn't something you do every day. It's not a task that's completed by your team every day. It's something that's done periodically. So especially when you think about voting system testing, or maybe it's electronic poll book testing, what are the steps that you're expecting your team to go through each election to make sure it's done correctly? So creating this standard operating procedure, updating your standard operating procedure is really important. It's an opportunity to utilize a checklist to outline all of the steps involved, but also including in your standard operating procedure, your test plan. What is the overall plan? And this is something that you can share then with the public as well, so they have a better understanding of all these steps you go through. And then outlining your timeline. So every year is different. We have different elections at different times. Sometimes you have special elections that crop up that you didn't expect, but spending time with your team to develop that timeline so that you make sure you have the resources and the people and the time to get everything set up and ready for these tests is really important and should be a part of your standard operating procedure as well. So the SOP should identify who is responsible for this testing. And I think that's really important, especially when you have larger offices and you have different groups of folks doing different tasks. At certain times, it's kind of all hands on deck, but it's really important that we have not only identified who's responsible for the actual testing, but also identifying who's responsible for making sure the testing is done correctly. That could be you. Maybe you're serving as the director, or maybe you're a supervisor of like the testing process. So that's maybe your responsibility then to make sure that that is done properly. But that should be listed in your SOP, identifying who's responsible. Now on the screen, we have a note here that just says, hey, remember, we love our vendors. Vendors are important to our process. They work hard to make sure that we have what we need as election officials to be able to do our jobs. And oftentimes they will provide assistance with the testing process. They'll be there to help with all of those systems. But it's really important that you make sure that they're helping. They're not overseeing and evaluating that testing process. That's the election official's job, is to make sure that it's done properly, that you have folks doing this testing and it's not being done solely by the vendor. So just a note about vendor assistance. Again, we love our vendors. We want to make sure that we own this responsibility because it is the election official's duty. I mentioned this already, but utilize a checklist. If you don't have one already, we have some examples in the appendix section of the guide. As Ryan mentioned, we've kind of outlined all throughout different checklists, so you can take those components. And oftentimes your vendor will have a checklist for you to follow. And so you can incorporate parts of that vendor testing requirements into your actual checklist. But I would encourage all of you folks, if you don't have one, ask your colleagues. Maybe it's a county over, or the city over, or maybe it's someone at the Secretary of State's or the Chief Election Official's office that has one. Go ahead and ask. Get one if you don't have one already, and then add to it. You don't have to start from scratch necessarily, but this is really important to apply those consistency and uniformity standards to our testing, especially oftentimes because you're going to have volunteers come in and do this testing for you, or maybe not necessarily volunteers, but people that aren't full-time staff. You want to make sure that you give everybody clear direction, and the checklist is just one opportunity to provide that to them. And then, we take this for granted, but again, we don't do this all the time. So conducting a training exercise with folks before to go over all the steps that you're expecting them to take is really important. It's an opportunity for folks to ask questions, to make sure that they're all on the same page as far as the testing process is concerned. And it's just something that should be incorporated into your overall practices as you think about testing. And with that, I'll bump it back over to Jennifer to see if we have any questions.
Thank you both. I know that for our audience today, that was a rapid fire, a high level overview of what's provided in our guide. I don't see any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, but I'm going to just give everyone a minute or maybe 30 seconds. Also, you should feel free to unmute if you want to come off mute and ask a question of our panelists. You can do that.
And
Becky, so I see, will the slides be available? We will be making a recording of this available. The guide is available, and fairly soon we will have these slides plus many others as part of the full logic and accuracy course available on our election learning lab. Let me just drop a link to that. However, if you need these for something that you're doing, also I should mention you're welcome to request Matt or Ryan to come and do this presentation at one of your conferences. We often show up to trainings that state or state associations are doing, and this is a much longer, we have a longer, more interactive version of this. But Becky, if you need those slides, email us support@electionsgroup.com, and we will share those with you that way. But right now, the slides will not be on the website. Deborah Lee, great to see you. Do you have model legislation for testing? Our statutes conflict and are unclear. The legislature is likely to consider a bill later this year, and our input on this subject is needed as we have numerous problems throughout the state last year. Deborah, that's a great question. I will let Matt and Ryan weigh in, but also we do know of a few states that have some good laws and policies around testing that we can point you to. Michigan being one of those, as you saw in the chat. Ryan, Matt, any other states come to mind that we could point Deborah to?
The first thing that I'm going to say is, as a former state official who worked on this, less is more in legislation, and hopefully that the legislation can provide a nimble process. So the legislation particularly would hopefully defer to a rulemaking process or a regulatory process that could be adopted by your chief election official. As Matthew had shown, on the way that technology changes, is the testing needs to be able to evolve similarly. So from my perspective, some of the best legislation is really very simple, that just defers to the state election official to develop rules and regulations around how to test. And then working with your chief election official, you can develop kind of test cases or testing processes for the independent types of technology. And in many cases, it shouldn't be so specific that it is going to conflict with certain types of vendors' technologies. Again, you want to leave it open for you all as the local elections officials conducting the test to make it as easy as possible for you.
Yeah, I think Ryan's spot on there as far as putting things in legislation and in the law makes things difficult to change. Many states obviously have rulemaking processes. I agree with that. We can kind of take a look at some examples that exist out there as far as rules that might be helpful, but I think it's one of those things that does have to evolve. But there are some minimum standards that can be placed in there. So we'll take a look and get back to you on that.
Deborah will follow up with you offline with some of those recommendations. Other questions?
While we're waiting for other questions to come in, I do want to go back. Number one, Olivia, thank you for the question and hello. And to your question about percentages, it should also mimic the type of testing that you're doing. So for instance, when we're talking about the public test being a sample, you can do less testing on that sample. However, for the actual logic and accuracy test, you should test every device, both for logic as well as for accuracy. And then when we're talking about things like the system validation or software validation, the hash testing, that would be a sampling as well. And so again, I always say the EMS should always be included. The central counts should always be included because there's few of them. But then you can do a sampling of the precinct tabulators and probably a different set of sampling on the precinct tabulator since they're counting than a ballot marking device that may not be counting and may have less impact should there be an error in the software election definition database. And then again, if you're looking at e-poll books, ballot on demand, and all of those types of things, a sample that fits for you. But I do really want to emphasize that for your logic and accuracy portion, or the logic testing and the accuracy portion, it should be on every device.
Thank you, Ryan. Well, I just want to thank both of you. We know this is a weighty topic. We appreciate all of you that joined us today. We appreciate you being interested and looking for ways to add robustness to your existing testing policies and procedures. One thing I'll point out as we close, that survey, I don't know if you all saw the survey results that popped up. There we go, fantastic. So you can see a good majority of you, 72%, indicated that you have experienced an error that could have been identified and remedied through testing. And I think a lot of those, I know from my own experience, had I done some of that extended testing that Ryan and Matt were talking about, thinking about my other systems, the other components attached to my voting system, I know I could have avoided some of the errors that I dealt with when I was running elections. So this is a really important topic. And back to that, I know you all can remember it, that slide that showed the headlines. We don't want any of you to be in the headlines. It hurts us deeply when we get calls for help or support, when we see that simple testing could have avoided that. So we appreciate you taking this seriously, and just reminding you again, the guide is there for you to download and use. As I mentioned, this whole course will be available on our Election Learning Lab, and then we're always willing to come and provide this at your conference or to your organization. Oh, we have one other question. So let's see. I am a new election official and an ADA accessibility coordinator. Oh, kudos on that. And I'm wondering if there are any accessibility factors to be considered in LNA testing. Matt, Ryan.
Yeah, so definitely. And again, I know both I talked fast and there was a lot of content, but one of the things that in the logic portion of the testing that you should always be looking into are the accessibility features. And so I mentioned specifically validating all of the audio files, but also testing, just the ballot marking device capabilities. So the accessible tactile interface, or the kind of how you maneuver through the ballot using the handheld device. Doing as we call, from a technological standpoint, testing your binary switches, whether that be the jelly switches that you can use, the red and green for your feet, or whether it's a sip and puff. Those are both operating off of the same inputs. They're binary, so testing, whether the sip and puff works, whether to move forward, whether the jelly switches move forward, and proofing not just the audio files, but also the visual. What a lot of people don't recognize is, in many cases, the programming that populates the electronic ballot interface or the touch screen is actually pulling from a different part of the database than the paper ballot. So if you just proofed your paper ballot, that doesn't necessarily mean that your accessible device is going to also be accurate. So doing some ballot proofing on the electronic interface as well.
Matt, anything you want to add? Thanks, Ryan.
No, I think he hit on it. Thank you.
Great. Lisa, I would just add, if you can find people that use those devices and your laws and policies allow you to bring them in, that's even better. I was really fortunate to have a school for the blind in my county, and we use them to conduct that portion of the test that Ryan just described. And I'll tell you what, they were much better at finding things than myself and my staff were. Okay.
And Jennifer, actually, if I can add one last point, that's a great point. And also work with your chief election official. So when I was in California, part of our certification process was doing accessibility testing. And we brought in people from California Council of the Blind, California Independent Living Center, and with a multitude of abilities. So everything from people who had to use the sip and puff devices to people who had dexterity issues, and learning how hard it is, for them to even just take the ballot from the ballot marking device to the scanner, and implementing some of those tests. But as we had talked about from a logic and accuracy perspective, we talked about legislators, candidates, and political parties. Invite members from all of your communities to come and observe, and allow them to work as well on the testing with you. So great point, Jennifer, and work with your state chief election official to build that into the certification process as well.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to read a comment. I also see a question, Olivia, so we'll get to that in just a second. Les, great comment. He says, as an example for accessibility, we had a very long ballot measure in a county where I worked that took more than 2 minutes to play the audio file. But the timeout on the voting machines was set to less than 2 minutes, and the session would time out if the voter listened to the full audio without touching the screen. Testing helped us notice this and extend the timeout for that election. That's an amazing example. We might steal that, Les, and incorporate that into our training. That's fantastic. Okay, just real quick, Olivia is asking about a good validation company that's certified when we're thinking about a website ADA. I'm thinking this is a great question for our partners at the Center for Civic Design, but Ryan and Matt, anything off the top of your head?
I would defer to Center for Civic Design as well. That's who I used when I was in California. That's who we partnered with when developing the voluntary voting system guidelines when I was at the EAC for the accessibility on the electronic ballot interface. And they gave us many contacts that we could work with. And so, yeah, I would also defer to Center for Civic Design.
Great. Olivia, if you need help getting in touch with them or if you would like us to connect you with them, feel free to reach out to us at support@electionsgroup.com and we will make that connection. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Matt. This was a great presentation. As I said, the resources mentioned today have all been placed in the chat, but as always, our inbox is open. So if there were things we didn't get to, questions you think about after we end this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us, support@electionsgroup.com. Thank you, and we'll see you all next time.